Whilst it is not their turn just yet, instead the Emperor's Children are up for pre-order this weekend, but my money is on the Soulblight Gravelords getting their turn to rise up from the grave very, very, very shortly afterwards, as in probably a week or two afterwards is my opinion. And we got our first hint today at some of their new rules, with 4 of their brand new models which are coming, which were teased back at the preview a few weeks ago, which is their faction terrain and their 3 new manifestations. So the Cursed Sepulchre is their terrain feature and is very much inspired by the old Gardens of Moor terrain that you could get a few years ago, if you remember that. It does look incredibly cool in my opinion, and I honestly think even if you weren't playing a game with any Soulblight or Death factions in it, this would be a brilliant set of buildings and some terrain just to add onto the board as some kind of village themed cemetery. I just think it goes so well and is so stunning. It's got such a good fantasy AOS aesthetic to it. And what I also really like about this terrain kit is that it is a dual terrain kit. It can instead be built as the Nexus of Grief, which is admittedly very similar. They're both on the screen at the moment. They are very, very similar, both of them. There's just a few unique slight changes in terms of what you build, but that is for the Nighthaunt. So if you play both of those armies like I do, then this kit is going to be an almost must-buy just to have the terrain features for both of your armies. In terms of the rules for this thing, they're a bit more on the mess side. They're not as good as the model design would hype it up to be, I don't think. It brings with it the Locus of Shyish rule, and that basically means whenever one of your wizards cast a summon spell for your manifestations, it can use the terrain feature as the point for visibility and range rather than from the wizard himself. It's not super exciting, although to be fair, with 3 separate terrain pieces spread out through your deployment and on the board, that could very much help you set up a manifestation in a much better, more optimal position for you. Being able to get some of your unique Soulblight manifestations on the other side of the board from your wizard or near to a combat that's ongoing, as we will see in a minute from the manifestations, could actually make quite a big difference. So I don't think it's awful, I just think it's a bit niche in what it does. It only impacts, as far as we can tell, the manifestation summoning. So if that is all it does, it's okay and definitely get it because it's a cool model, but the rule is a little bit mediocre. I'm kind of hoping it has some extra rule alongside it, like some of the other faction terrain does. Maybe something to just help it interact with something in your army rules a bit. Maybe something like the Rising Dead or the Deathly Invocation rules, just to add something else to it so it isn't wholly revolving around your manifestations. But then on the subject of your manifestations, you do, as I said, get 3 new ones, and like the Cursed Sepulchre, they do look fantastic. All of them are super cool, they're super exciting and stylish, and they just do look wonderful, like in my opinion all Soulblight stuff does. They are so blessed with how good most of their designs and redesigns end up looking. Again, like the terrain piece though, they suffer maybe a little bit on the rules front. They don't seem as amazing as you would maybe hope that they would be. I don't know if we've seen all the rules yet in the article they showed us today. They just gave us a snippet, so there may be a little bit more to each of them that we haven't seen. But in terms of what we got shown today, they're certainly not bad. There is definitely some use to them. They're just not super as exciting as their models would lead you to believe. You get access to the Hand of Nagash, which is amazing. It's just this giant skeletal hand like coming out of the ether, ready to grab the enemy, which is just so cool and so in fitting with sort of how you'd imagine Nagash to, if he can't be bothered to be there in person, just send his hand through to grab an enemy. But that comes with the rule of Chill Grasp, and it means that in any combat phase you can pick an enemy unit in combat with the manifestation, and you roll a dice, and on a 4+, it reduces the enemy control score of the unit to a maximum of 1 when they're within 3 inches of it, which is amazing. And then also when they're within 3 inches of it, they can't use move abilities. So I think this is probably the best of the bunch for the manifestations, being able to, on a 50-50 chance, so it's not always going to go off, but being able to potentially lock down an enemy unit and make them not only awful at holding objectives, but also unable to get around the board and get where the enemy, where your opponent, should I say, needs them to be, is really, really strong. The main downside to this, of course, is that it is only on a 4+, so you can't really rely on it all that well. And also, the enemy unit has to essentially be in combat range with your manifestation. So once this has happened and you've got your manifestation up ready to do this ability, the enemy is just going to kill it because they can fight into it. It's not going to be super durable, I don't think. So they are just going to kill it, and then you won't be able to lock them down and tie them down in combat. So it's only really good if you get it off, get it into an enemy, and then get that 4+ spell off, or get that 4+ ability off and lock them down. And even then, it's only going to lock them down for, in all honesty, just a turn, because then they're going to prioritize killing your manifestation, and then they'll be free to move in their next turn anyway. So unless you're fighting a really weak chaff unit, this manifestation isn't going to last long. I would consider it more of a speed bump than an actual stopping tool, but I do think that for that one critical turn, it could be incredibly handy to stop. Sorry for the pun, by the way, incredibly handy, but it could be really useful for stopping a weaker chaff unit or screening unit that the enemy wanted to get into position from getting where your opponent needs them to be. You can also summon an Elder Vampire as one of your manifestations, or at least you can summon the corpse of one, which is a bit weird to me. You'd think they'd turn to dust or something, like in Buffy. Like, if there is just a skeleton of a vampire, could you, in theory, raise the skeleton as a skeleton warrior, but it would be a vampire skeleton warrior? Would that be better at fighting? Would it be... I don't know. How does that work? But either way, you can summon the corpse of an Elder Vampire, and what that does is it grants you the Draw on Power ability, meaning in any combat phase you can pick a friendly hero wholly within 12 inches of your manifestation, and they can either heal D3, or you can choose for them to get +1 attacks on their melee weapons, but then you have to banish this manifestation after that. So it's either a really good, reliable, constant source of extra healing. D3 in every combat phase is really strong and will definitely help keep some of your tougher heroes going and trucking that bit longer. But in that one turn where you need as much damage as possible into the enemy, you can then do that one ability. And then even though you do have to then banish the manifestation, getting +1 attacks on something like Radakar's Bloodslick Claws or Manfred's Geistvor can be incredibly handy. And if you just need to kill off the last few models in an enemy unit, could be worth going for this just to get the most amount of damage out of your heroes, especially if you think you're going to kill them with that extra attack, so you won't need that healing next turn either. So it is a pretty great defensive and offensive summon, and I think what really makes it good is that you can potentially get this right where you need it next to one of your heroes thanks to the Curse Sepulchre terrain. So having those two things in this sort of combo ability could make it very worthwhile indeed. The final one is essentially what happens to the old Bat Swarm models that GW have, and the Sanguine Swarm is essentially a load of bats. This looks to me to be a pure damage output summon. I'm almost certain it's going to be similar to something like the Quicksilver Stored style manifestation with just a load of fairly mediocre 1 damage attacks that can just go into chaff and cut through them as fast as possible. But the ability for this manifestation is Leeching Bites. And what that means is that every critical hit from this manifestation also heals it 1. So you are going to be able to go into those weaker units and potentially keep them tied up right until you kill them by just chipping them down with your 1 damage, but then healing yourself whenever you roll a 6 to hit. So I think it looks really fun. It's going to be great at going into, as I said, those weaker units that won't be able to kill it in just 1 turn. So you can keep doing a load of damage into them, keep healing yourself up, and just slowly but surely chip them down until you've killed them. So I think it looks like a really fun manifestation actually. And as I said earlier, I love the look of all of these. I think Soulblight really always do get a lot of love when it comes to GW and making their new models. So the terrain piece looks fantastic. The manifestations all look really cool and fun to build and paint and have on the board. And I just think whilst the rules are maybe not the most amazing, they're pretty good. I don't think anything in the manifestation wise here is going to be enough to replace something like Purple Sun or the Gravetide or that kind of thing. But they do seem fun, they seem thematic, they seem really fluffy, and I certainly don't think they're awful. I don't think they're bad rules. I think they do have a place. They are just not as powerful as some other manifestations that we have in the game. So I think overall they're going to be a really nice addition to a Soulblight list, and what I think is really the good news out of all of this is that we finally got our terrain feature, we finally got our endless spells, and alongside the new Barrow Guard, the new Vordry, the new Vampire Lords and everything like that, White Kings and everything, it is shaping up to be a very, very good time to be a Soulblight player. But as always, I'd love to know what you think of these 4 models. What do you think is the best in terms of the manifestations or the terrain feature? What are your thoughts on the abilities they bring to the game? Let me know all of your thoughts and theories and comments down below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.